Once you understand the basics of complex numbers or dealing with imaginary numbers, we can perform basic operations as we would with other numbers. We're going to look at several different types of operations. The first we're going to do is dealing with exponent powers. So for example, if I have something like I to the fifth times 8 over 3I cubed, notice that these are just exponents, and so we deal with them in the same way we would any variable to an exponent. Here we're dividing, so we're going to subtract these two exponents, and this will become I squared times 8 over 3. From our previous video, we know that I squared is equal to -1, so this becomes -8 thirds. Remember, those four powers of I are the only four you should list in a final answer. You can also perform other basic operations, including addition and subtraction and multiplication. Let's look at an example of subtraction. For example, suppose I have the complex number, and by complex, we just mean that it has both a real and an imaginary part, minus -3 minus 2I. Treat these with like terms. And so we end up with 12 plus 3I. I'm going to distribute my negative, and this becomes plus 3 plus 2I. And now I can combine my like terms, which leaves me with 15 plus 5I. Last but not least, suppose we have multiplication. Here you have to be a little more careful because if we're dealing with something like this, we are going to FOIL the expression. And here, when we're foiling, we're going to do our first terms, which gives us 21, our outside terms, which gives us plus 14I, our inside terms gives us minus 15I, but our last terms, notice, gives us negative 10I squared because we have I times I. That leaves us with 21. These are like terms, which leaves us with negative I, and then negative 10. But remember, I squared is -1. So this can further simplify to 21 minus I. Negative 10 times -1 gives us plus 10. And so we end up with 31 minus I. The last example I want to show you of basic operations when dealing with complex numbers is how to simplify a complex expression by multiplying by the conjugate. When we have something like 3 plus 2I, I'm sorry, 2 plus 3I, if you remember from when we dealt with radicals, we could not have a radical in the fraction in the denominator of a fraction. Well, I is the square root of a -1, so we have to get rid of that in the denominator. To do that, we're going to multiply by the conjugate, just like we did in our radical section. And the conjugate in this case is going to be 2 minus 3I. If you remember, we just switch this sign. We multiply both top and bottom by this. I recommend leaving it not multiplied on top, just in case things cancel. And if you remember from our radical section, when we multiply the bottom two pieces, we're foiling, and we multiply first, we get 4, outside we get minus 6I, inside we get plus 6I, and last we get negative 9I squared. And if you remember, these middle terms will always cancel, so you don't ever actually need to multiply those. Notice, however, when we're dealing with imaginary numbers though, this last term, we have negative 9, but I squared, if you remember, is -1. So this is going to become 4 plus 9, which becomes 13 for our denominator. Nothing here cancels, and so we're left with 6 minus 9I over 13.